Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we discussed how Zalario's mind was pushed to its limits as he grappled with Sarian's chaotic situation. His dissatisfaction with the current events, respect for his opponents, and detailed analysis of the battlefield led him to consider breaking away from Feldway. Amidst this turmoil, Seal seized the opportunity to help Zalario break free from the control of the Lord of Justice and even enhanced his ultimate skill. This unexpected turn of events caused Zalario to question Rimuru's true identity. In this episode, Rimuru and his allies, having gathered their strength, will focus on the operation to free Milim from control. However, even after breaking the control, Milim remains in a berserk and uncontrollable state. How will Rimuru handle this situation? Feldway will make another appearance, striking a decisive blow while Rimuru is occupied with Milim. So, let's get started. Shifting focus to Rimuru, he was intently observing Milim. Despite her relentless destructive attacks, Milim showed no signs of fatigue. In fact, her power continued to increase. The mere thought of engaging such an opponent head-on sent chills down Rimuru's spine. But he had no choice, he had to continue the fight. Rimuru glanced around at his comrades who were standing by, noting that Benimaru, as expected from the strongest commander, had everyone perfectly prepared, with the formations flawlessly arranged. Rimuru once again checked with Benimaru about their readiness. Benimaru confidently confirmed that everything was in place and mentioned that Leon and Zalario had also joined under his command. Satisfied, Rimuru nodded. The plan, devised by Rimuru and Seal, was to unleash a full-force attack to distract Milim during the 3-second window when she paused before attacking the divine tree. During this brief moment, Rimuru needed to remove Feldway's Regalia dominion that had been controlling Milim. As anticipated, in the instant Milim paused to prepare her attack on the divine tree, the Magus army unleashed a coordinated barrage of beam cannons. The energy level of these beams was equivalent to a nuclear cannon, all converging at a single point aimed at Milim. However, despite the temperature at the convergence point surpassing 100 million degrees, Milim did not even bother to assume a defensive stance, completely ignoring the hundreds of beams striking her. Rimuru felt uneasy as it seemed these powerful attacks had little effect. But Seal assured him that the attacks did manage to slightly divert Milim's attention, buying them a tiny bit of time. At the same moment, Milim extended her hands forward. Rimuru began to panic. It was clear that the hundreds of attacks had not disrupted Milim's rhythm at all. With this realization, Rimuru knew that they now had to rely solely on Benimaru and the others. The first to take action was Souei, who unleashed his most powerful attack, Thousand Shadow Death. Souei's shadows transformed into countless arms that attempted to bind Milim, but her movements were unaffected. Undeterred, Souei charged forward, using his own body in an attempt to stop Milim. However, Souei's duplicates were obliterated by Leon's ultimate technique, 100 Breaker. Leon skillfully manipulated disintegration, transforming it into beams of destructive light that targeted both Milim and Souei. In an instant, Souei's parallel existence was reduced to ashes. Yet these attacks still failed to phase Milim. This was because, at the moment Milim began gathering power, she enveloped herself in the radiant glow of star particles, forming a barrier that even multiple particle disintegration attacks couldn't penetrate, far stronger than the absolute guard of the Lord of Oath. Following their assault, Zalario unleashed his most powerful attack, Insanity Hash. During his earlier battle with Leon and Souei, Zalario hadn't used this skill even once. His blade, capable of slicing through the alien exoskeletons of insect generals, carried a sword pressure far more powerful than Souei and Leon combined. Yet when this mighty strike landed on Milim, it only caused her invisible barrier to flicker momentarily before the attack was nullified. Rimuru, observing from the sidelines, found it hard to believe. Milim's strength was beyond comprehension. Every strike just executed held power that even Rimuru himself couldn't ignore, yet it had no effect on Milim whatsoever. Now less than a second remained before Milim would unleash her Drago Nova. However, Benimaru still wore a confident smile. This was only the beginning. Suddenly, Souei and Zalario moved in tandem, indicating that everything up to this point had been part of Benimaru's plan. In Benimaru's hands, the Odachi Lotus began to emit a crimson glow, powerful enough to incinerate everything in its path. This was Benimaru's ultimate move, prominence acceleration. A black light, akin to the sun, gradually became infused with crimson flames, transforming into an eastern dragon with enough ferocity to potentially devour Milim in a single bite. Seeing this, Milim was finally forced to respond, as the sudden surge of the fire dragon's power exceeded tens of millions of existence points. The concept of power is calculated based on the relationship between energy output and total energy. No matter how vast the total energy is, if the output is weak, the power is weak. Conversely, even if the output is strong, if the total energy isn't sufficient, the resulting power will be low. Rimuru found himself deep in thought. Benimaru was incredibly strong, but compared to Milim, his energy was insignificant. It seemed impossible for him to unleash such a high-energy attack. Just then, Seal chimed in, explaining that she had lent some of Rimuru-sama's power to Benimaru. Rimuru was even more perplexed, realizing that he hadn't felt any different, and was completely unaware that such a thing had occurred. Rimuru couldn't help but tease Seal, pointing out how she always seemed to do things secretly, even though it was indeed helpful to everyone. Still, Rimuru wished that Seal would inform him from the start, so he could feel more involved in the process. Seal responded calmly, stating that everything was still in the experimental phase, and she intended to inform Rimuru-sama only after the experiment was successful. Seal maintained her usual perfectionist approach. According to Seal, Rimuru's ultimate skill, the God of Void, contains an incredibly difficult-to-harness energy known as imaginary collapse. Seal had been researching ways to utilize this energy. As part of this research, Seal had secretly conducted power experiments with Rimuru's most powerful subordinates, designing and constructing a mechanism to transfer the imaginary collapse energy. Rimuru remarked that if experiments were necessary, he could just do them himself. Seal firmly replied that the energy was far too immense, and that she could not risk exposing her master to such danger. Following her plan, Seal had successfully used the Soul Corridor to supply this energy to the subordinates involved in the experiment. Although the mechanism wasn't fully perfected, it could already temporarily boost their power levels significantly. This new ability was named Imaginary Supply. Back on the battlefield, the fire dragon created by prominence acceleration surrounded Milim. Milim seemed to find this situation extremely unpleasant, and halted her movements to free herself from the binding. Seizing the opportunity, Souei immediately used Mystic Thread Binding to try to further restrain Milim, while Leon deployed 100 Prison, forming a Spiritron cage to trap her. At this point, Rimuru noticed a weakness in Zalario. Although his attacks were powerful, he lacked methods for restraining opponents. With Milim's Drago Nova temporarily delayed, the stage was set for Seal to take action. However, contrary to Rimuru's expectations, Seal completed the operation in an instant, effectively nullifying the Regalia Dominion that had been controlling Milim. But a new problem quickly arose. Although the control had been lifted, Milim was still in a berserk state. If the battle continued in this manner, even the shockwaves from Milim's rampage could cause irreversible damage to Sarian. The only viable solution was to change the battlefield. Rimuru began contemplating options, realizing that the surrounding areas were all human territories, and the only place he could move the fight to was the territory controlled by Dagruel. He couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for Dagruel. At the same time, Souei sent a thought communication, indicating that he would take care of evacuating the citizens near the Heaven Tower. Anticipating an emergency, Souei had previously left a parallel existence there. This highlighted Souei's capabilities. True strength isn't just about raw power but also about the ability to foresee various scenarios and develop appropriate strategies. As Benimaru's shadow-like presence, Souei truly proved to be a reliable ally. However, at that moment, the situation took another unexpected turn. Time stopped. Rimuru couldn't help but feel a surge of panic. Who could have done this? It would have been manageable if Milim had also been frozen in time, but the real problem was that Milim continued to move as if nothing had happened. In a world where time has stopped, all defenses become nullified. Facing Milim under these circumstances, even the slightest brush with her overwhelming aura could be fatal. Rimuru had to quickly lure Milim to the desolate Barren Land, but the problem was that with time stopped, Souei wouldn't be able to complete the evacuation of the civilians. However, Rimuru didn't have the luxury of worrying about that now. His priority was to lead Milim to the dead desert. Shouting to catch Milim's attention, Rimuru began moving. The two clashed fiercely in midair, and the situation grew increasingly dire. Rimuru could feel his stamina slowly draining, while Milim's power continued to surge without end. At this rate, it was a hopeless battle. Just as Rimuru was becoming overwhelmed, a thought communication from Veldora reached him. Rimuru was puzzled. How was Veldora unaffected by the time stop? It's important to note that under normal circumstances, during time stop, any magic involving magicules should be impossible to use. However, if there is a soul corridor between the parties, they can still communicate through it. Back on the battlefield, there was no time for deep thought. Rimuru quickly responded to Veldora. Veldora reported that Xian's battlefield was in a dire crisis. Although everyone was fighting bravely, they were unable to counter Dagruel's time stop. Rimuru finally understood. Dagruel was the one who had activated time stop. Rimuru realized that his fear of Dagruel using spatial transfer to launch a surprise attack had come true, but it also meant that Xian and the others had fought valiantly enough to force Dagruel into using time stop. Rimuru was filled with anxiety. If this continued, Xian and Luminous would undoubtedly perish. But how could he possibly reach Dagruel and Luminous' battlefield instantly within a stop time? To use spatial transfer, one would need the infant coordinates of the destination. While distance becomes irrelevant in a stopped world, the need for precise infant data from the location is crucial. Rimuru could access infant data in his immediate vicinity, but gathering it from Luminous' distant battlefield, then returning to initiate a spatial transfer, would take too long enough for Dagruel to kill Xian and Luminous several times over. And to make matters worse, Rimuru was still dealing with Milim. With no other options, Rimuru could only ask Veldora to assist Xian and Luminous. Rimuru doubted that Veldora would make it in time, but he had to try. Veldora, however, was thrilled and eagerly awaited Rimuru's permission. As for the method of transfer, the one who solved that problem was Diablo. At that same moment, Diablo's voice joined the thought communication, revealing that he had already contacted Ultima, who was on the battlefield and had obtained the necessary infant data, which had been passed on to Veldora-sama. And so, Veldora took action. Performing a spatial transfer within a stop time was an incredibly difficult feat. It required both parties to understand time stop and for those individuals to be connected via a soul corridor. However, what seemed nearly impossible elsewhere was surprisingly straightforward within Rimuru and his powerful friends. Seeing that Diablo and Ultima had also mastered controlling infant within the time stop, Rimuru felt greatly encouraged. With Veldora's action, time suddenly resumed its flow. Rimuru understood that Veldora had likely succeeded in reaching the battlefield, and had forced Dagruel to cancel the time stop, as maintaining the time stop required a tremendous amount of energy. Feeling reassured, Rimuru focused on dealing with Milim and guiding her toward the Barren Land. Shifting the perspective to Jahil, who was facing off against Kigali and the others, he was increasingly frustrated. Despite his opponents being weaker, he couldn't gain the upper hand. However, Jahil had regained his composure and was carefully observing the situation around him. The sudden appearance of Milim, with her terrifying power, made Jahil tremble. But more pressing was the sight of Zalario, who, for reasons unknown to Jahil, was assisting the enemy in restraining Milim. Jahil realized that Zalario had betrayed them. This was a significant problem. If it were only Kigali and Sylvia, it wouldn't be so bad, but with Zalario also turning against him, Jahil faced certain death. Furious, Jahil sent a thought communication to Feldway, expressing that the situation on the ground was completely different from what had been promised. After a moment of silence, Feldway, upon learning of his comrade's betrayal, also seemed unusually disturbed. Jehiel decided that he couldn't afford to waste any more time and resolved to retreat immediately. Although retreating in the face of weaker opponents was humiliating, it was this very caution that had kept Jehiel alive until now, otherwise he would have been killed by Milim during her last rampage. Jehiel gripped his mythic weapon, Origin Blood, and unleashed his full power. He hadn't just been mindlessly fighting. Throughout the battle with Kigali, Sylvia, and the others, Jehiel had been secretly spreading his magicules across the battlefield. Now, combined with the power of Origin Blood and his thermal energy, he was ready to release a wide-range spell, Evil Blood Wave, capable of evaporating an entire nation. Jehiel silently rejoiced, calculating whether his opponents could withstand his attack. Although this wide-range spell wouldn't be lethal to supremely powerful beings, it was certainly beyond the endurance of high-level mages. By now, Jehiel's magicules had covered the entire battlefield, including the Magus army and Zalario's forces. Jehiel didn't care about friend or foe, sacrifices were irrelevant as long as he could escape. Laughing maniacally, Jehiel ignited the entire battlefield, engulfing Sarion's divine tree in flames that erupted continuously. As the flames raged on, consuming everything in their path, Jehiel reveled in his perceived victory. However, at the very moment Jehiel's presence vanished, all the flames miraculously disappeared. Benimaru chuckled, commenting on how Jehiel had no observational skills whatsoever. Not only were Sylvia, Tia, and the others unharmed, but the Magus army also emerged without serious injuries. Even the divine tree, which had been crackling in the fire, appeared only slightly scorched and would recover in a few days. Of course, all of this was due to Benimaru's secret maneuvers. The magicule that Jehiel released to cover the battlefield was actually a flammable substance called blood mist. Although it only slightly differed in scent from natural magicules, it couldn't fool Benimaru's mana manipulation. Sylvia also noticed the danger and discussed possible countermeasures with Benimaru. However, detecting a plot and resolving it are two different things. By the time the blood mist had permeated the entire battlefield, any action would likely result in casualties. The true solution came when Benimaru received a revelation, a voice from Seal. Seal suggested using Elmesia's ultimate skill, Lord of Heavenly Wind, to gather the blood mist, and then igniting it with Benimaru's Lord of Shimmering Flame. Following these instructions without hesitation, Benimaru took action. He understood that some things were best left unquestioned. He had heard this voice before in a moment of crisis, and decided it was best to follow its guidance as if nothing unusual had happened. Perhaps this was why everything always seemed to work out as Rimuru-sama expected. Since this voice was beneficial to Rimuru-sama, Benimaru felt he had to obey it without question. Through the combined efforts of everyone involved, they finally managed to avert disaster. Once Jehiel had fled far from the battlefield, Benimaru sighed with relief and collapsed. Souei, having anticipated this, caught him just in time. It was no wonder. During this battle, Benimaru had not only had to orchestrate the complex strategy to distract Milim, but also assist Sylvia and the others in dealing with Jehiel. On top of that, he had to neutralize Jehiel's schemes without being detected, minimizing the damage. Elmesia looked at the unconscious Benimaru. Her eyes filled with respect, and her tone was gentle. To her, Benimaru was the hero who had saved her country. However, the crisis wasn't entirely over. Zalario and his army were still present on the battlefield. Both sides' armies watched each other cautiously, waiting to see how the other would react. As Elmesia's mind raced, simulating various possible scenarios, Zalario made the first move. The newly freed Zalario addressed his troops, explaining that he had been under control and was no longer following Feldway. He had come to realize the value of freedom after being released from Feldway's control. After the war with the insect race, Zalario had agreed to help Feldway only because they had been friends since his creation. However, the current Zalario could no longer align with Feldway's actions. Looking over the battlefield, now scorched by flames, with a clear blue sky overhead and the divine tree standing tall as the gentle breeze rustled its leaves, Zalario expressed his readiness to focus on other things after being forced into endless battles for so long. His subordinates shared this sentiment, and they decided to slowly find their own ways of living. But there was one condition: the world needed to be at peace for that to happen. Thus, Zalario and his troops set their next goal. The world was so beautiful, yet Feldway had ignored this, becoming a threat to its very existence. As a friend, Zalario could no longer allow him to wreak havoc. Zalario and his subordinates decided to fight one last battle before their freedom, to bring peace to the world and stop Feldway's ambitions. With that, Zalario and Elmesia agreed to a truce and joined forces to face Feldway. Zalario's phantom army temporarily stationed themselves in Sarian, ready to assist in the coming conflict. And all of this, Feldway observed as if from a god's eye view. The betrayal of Zalario, one of his very few confidants and friends, was something Feldway could hardly imagine. This betrayal sent Feldway into a frenzy once again. After losing his friend Michael, and now with Zalario leaving his side, it was only after losing them that he realized how precious they had been. Unbeknownst to anyone, Feldway's heart gradually twisted beyond repair. No longer lost in uncertainty, he vowed to prove the existence of God, even if it meant wagering everything he had. Vega, standing nearby, asked Feldway about the next steps, much as he had done when Michael died. Compared to the frenzied Feldway, Vega seemed carefree, living only for his personal goals and pleasures, free from any responsibility. Feldway, seeing Vega in this light, gave a hollow, empty smile but assured him that everything was still on track. Although Milim had not destroyed the divine tree, Feldway had other ways to achieve its destruction. Despite Zalario's betrayal, Feldway's plan remained intact. Regaining his confidence, Feldway felt the decisive moment was near, and the lingering doubts in his heart were completely erased by Zalario's defection. Now, with only one purpose left, Feldway found himself unable to stop. Feldway ordered Vega, Dino, and the others to attack Ramirez's labyrinth. Vega appeared thrilled, while my Furuki began her preparations under Feldway's watchful gaze. Dino, on the other hand, looked reluctant but was completely ignored. Feldway declared that with Veldora, the labyrinth's greatest defense, currently absent, it was the perfect time to launch an attack. And so Vega, Mai Furuki, Dino, Pico, and Gracia set out. As Feldway savored the quiet of Star Palace, he laughed, a mix of sorrow, joy, and madness. With the final stages of his plan in sight, he too moved into action. The perspective shifts back to Rimuru, who was leading Milim toward the Barren Land. Suddenly, Rimuru felt a wave of unease. Could all his actions be part of Feldway's predictions? Given how often Seal had led him step by step through situations, this feeling wasn't unfounded. The most critical concern was that if Milim were to be led somewhere, the only viable place was the barren Heaven Tower, a place strong enough to withstand even Michael's attacks. Additionally, the surrounding desert wouldn't suffer further from Milim's destructive rampage. Although this might not be ideal for Dagruel, considering the current hostile state between them, it seemed like a minor issue as long as Souei could successfully evacuate the civilians in time. However, this also meant there was a good chance Feldway had anticipated this situation. Seal hesitated slightly, expressing doubts that Feldway could foresee such a scenario. Rimuru also found it hard to believe that Feldway's predictive abilities could surpass Seal's. After all, Zalario's defection wasn't something Feldway had expected, and without Zalario's assistance, the smooth removal of Milim's control wouldn't have been possible. Therefore, it seemed even less likely that Feldway could predict the events to come. As Rimuru was wrestling with his worries, an urgent message came from Ramirez. Frantically, she informed him that Dino and his group had begun their attack on the labyrinth. Although Ramirez and the others had already entered a state of emergency, she still felt uneasy without the storm dragon Veldora stationed there. Anxiety surged through Rimuru once again. However, he reassured himself that sending Veldora to assist Luminous was the right choice, otherwise, the situation might still be frozen in time, and the destruction of the divine tree could have been inevitable. Rimuru reaffirmed that his earlier decision was correct. Rimuru encouraged Ramirez, telling her that he first needed to deal with Milim and asked her to hold out for as long as possible. He assured her that Benimaru, though currently in a state of extreme fatigue and unconsciousness, would soon recover and be able to return to support the labyrinth. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Ramirez, still pouting, ended the call. Rimuru's frustration continued to grow. The outcome of the battle between Guy and Velzard was uncertain. The labyrinth was under attack and could face a fierce battle, and Milim was still in a berserk state with no clear way to stop her. Seal suggested that if someone could help hold off Milim, even for just a little while, they could activate Regalia Dominion to seal her movements. Although Rimuru was reluctant to control Milim, he realized that if the worst came to pass, there might be no other choice. But even so, they lacked the crucial person needed to stall Milim long enough for Rimuru to activate Regalia Dominion. The situation had become entirely reactive. Milim's power was beyond anything they had anticipated. Just a moment ago, using imaginary supply to boost Benimaru's power had left him in a state of extreme exhaustion. Now, while Rimuru could still counterattack, he found himself scrambling to fend off Milim's assaults, with no time to even think about Feldway's plans. Soon, the Heaven Tower came into view. Rimuru hoped that the Heaven Tower could withstand Milim's attacks, which would allow him to focus on other preparations. However, the more ominous a premonition, the more likely it was to come true. As Rimuru and Milim battled fiercely, a voice full of malice suddenly echoed from the sky, Feldway's voice, announcing that he had been waiting for Rimuru for a long time. Rimuru couldn't help but click his tongue in frustration. Feldway had indeed set his sights on him. But it was too late. The worst-case scenario was unfolding once again. At that moment, Seal issued a rare urgent warning, advising Rimuru to retreat immediately. It wasn't just a retreat, it was an escape. But with Milim's overwhelming attacks, escaping quickly was impossible, which was precisely what Feldway had anticipated. Rimuru realized Feldway's plan. It was the same as before when Velzard was used to stall Milim, only this time, Rimuru had become the key figure in Feldway's scheme. Milim was once again under control. Under Feldway's domination, Milim began to lose strength. With both Milim and Feldway to contend with, Rimuru knew he stood no chance of winning. He cursed Feldway's treachery, hurling insults without holding back. There was no time to be polite now. Feldway only laughed derisively, saying it was time for Rimuru to leave the stage. This might have been an acknowledgement of Rimuru's strength, as even at this point, Feldway had not chosen to fight Rimuru head-on, despite Rimuru being prepared to face both of them. Feldway declared that Rimuru would disappear into the ends of time and space, and then activated his skill, chronosaltation. It was a familiar scene, reminiscent of the attack that made Veldrind vanish from this world. Rimuru's consciousness began to fade as he was transported to an unknown place, unclear whether it was in the past, present, or future, due to Feldway's temporal manipulation. Alright, that's all for this video. Regarding imaginary supply, the three subordinates who participated in the experiment were Diablo, Zijin, and Benimaru. Because this energy was difficult to endure, Seal could only select the strongest among Rimuru's subordinates. This also confirms that these three are the strongest among the 12 Guardian Lords. Additionally, the God of Void alone isn't sufficient to complete imaginary supply, but fortunately, Rimuru's other ultimate skill, Lord of Abundance, allows Seal to grant this energy to subordinates. Imagine how powerful this ability could be. If it becomes stable, any of Rimuru's subordinates who meet the criteria could instantly unleash power rivaling that of true dragons. This ability will play a decisive role in the upcoming 21st volume of the novel. We also see that Rimuru can use Regalia Dominion on Milim, but only if someone could hold Milim's attention for a certain period. Feldway executed this strategy brilliantly, first using Velzard to stall Milim and control her, and then using Rimuru to gain control over her again. Even Seal didn't foresee Feldway's actions this time. As for why Feldway didn't kill Rimuru but instead chose to banish him to the ends of time and space, I believe there are a few reasons. First, controlling Milim likely affected Feldway's own abilities and existence points. Milim's existence point was constantly growing, currently at least over 100 million and still increasing. While Feldway was powerful, controlling Milim required reducing his own energy to manage hers. Second, perhaps Feldway knew that killing Rimuru might lead to his resurrection elsewhere. As long as Veldora was alive, Rimuru could not die. Although Feldway might not know the exact details, someone as smart as him could easily guess this. In our next episode, we will begin the review of TenSura Volume 21. In the next episode, we will see how everyone reacts to Rimuru's disappearance and get an update on the battle between Veldora and Dagruel. The next story will be very exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.